Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Oliver Grant always believed that true wealth wasn't about showing off what you had, but about building something solid beneath the surface. From a young age, he developed an almost obsessive relationship with code, algorithms, and systems that could solve real problems. While other college classmates dreamed of flashy startups and funding rounds, Oliver preferred the silence of non-disclosure agreements, perpetual licenses, and royalties that trickled in month after month, discreetly, into accounts no one even knew existed. He wasn't the type to post pictures of expensive vacations or show off imported cars. His life was simple: a 5-year-old Toyota sedan, basic clothes, home-cooked dinners. To outside observers, Oliver was just another competent but unremarkable software engineer, a man who paid his bills on time but never drew attention. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Amanda, his wife, shared that perception. When they first met, she was finishing up her graphic design degree, and he was already working at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle. Their relationship was calm, without major surprises. Oliver was attentive, punctual, predictable. She liked that at first: the emotional stability, the absence of drama, the feeling that she could build something with someone dependable. He never forgot birthdays, always helped with household chores, and listened whenever she needed to vent. He was the kind of man any mother would say was perfect to marry. And that's exactly what Amanda's mother said when she told her Oliver had proposed. They got married 3 years later in a simple, understated ceremony. The reception was held in a modest hall with few guests and discreet decorations. Amanda had even suggested something bigger, but Oliver argued that he'd rather invest the money in more important things, like their honeymoon or the house they'd buy someday. She agreed, thinking it made sense. During the wedding preparations, Oliver insisted on a prenuptial agreement with full separation of assets. He explained it was the fairest and most transparent way to start a marriage, that this way, each would keep financial independence and mutual protection. Amanda, unfamiliar with legal matters and trusting him completely, signed the papers without question. After all, she loved Oliver and saw no reason to doubt his intentions. The first few years were good. Amanda worked at an advertising agency, earned a decent salary, and split household expenses with Oliver. They lived in a rented apartment, nothing luxurious, but comfortable. It had 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen, and a small balcony where Amanda grew a few plants. They went out to dinner occasionally, usually at simple neighborhood restaurants. They vacationed at nearby beaches during holidays, always staying in budget-friendly accommodations, nothing extravagant. They led an ordinary life, without upheavals. Amanda never questioned where Oliver's money went. She knew he received a fixed salary from his company, around $80,000 a year, and that seemed sufficient for the lifestyle they maintained. What she didn't know was that, in parallel, Oliver was licensing proprietary algorithms he'd developed alone during late nights and weekends over nearly a decade. These algorithms were used by logistics companies, fintechs, and e-commerce platforms to optimize complex processes, delivery routing, fraud detection, demand forecasting. Each contract generated semi-annual or annual royalties ranging from $50,000 to $300,000, depending on usage volume. Oliver meticulously reinvested everything: tech company stocks, real estate investment trusts, cryptocurrencies bought in early cycles when the market still underestimated them. He maintained separate accounts at different institutions, reported everything correctly to tax authorities, but never mentioned it to Amanda. Not out of malice, but because, to him, this was technical work, not marital life. It was as if they were 2 parallel worlds that didn't need to intersect. As the years passed, Amanda began to feel her life was stagnant. She watched friends travel to Europe, post photos from Maldives resorts, buy designer handbags, and dine at Michelin-starred restaurants. Meanwhile, she and Oliver kept to the same routine: work, home, Netflix, and the occasional weekend outing to a cheap movie or dinner. She started complaining more often. She said Oliver lacked ambition, seemed resigned to a mediocre life, never proposed anything new, and had no big dreams. He, always calm, replied that they were doing fine, that they didn't need more than what they had, and that what mattered was being together and building something solid. But those answers began to sound like flimsy excuses. Amanda felt she deserved more. She felt life was passing her by and she wasn't enjoying it. She felt she'd tied herself to a man without vision, without drive, without the spark she saw in her friends' husbands. It was in this emotional state, growing dissatisfaction and chronic boredom, that she met Brett. Brett was a real estate agent of the kind who sells lifestyles before selling houses. He wore a Rolex, drove a convertible BMW, and spoke about real estate investments as if he were a financial guru. He had that practiced salesman's smile and artificial confidence that impresses those unfamiliar with his type. Amanda met him at a design and decor fair where he was promoting a new luxury condo development in the area. Brett was charming from the first second. He complimented her work, asked about her dreams, and made it seem like life could be far more exciting than it currently was. He said she seemed like a woman who deserved better things, someone with the potential to move in more sophisticated circles. They exchanged numbers. The messages started innocently but quickly took on a different tone. Brett talked about travel, fine dining restaurants, expensive wines, and a life Amanda believed she was missing out on with Oliver. He sent photos of paradise-like places, seaside dinners, and five-star hotel rooms. He asked if she wasn't tired of living the same way, if she didn't miss adventure, excitement, truly living. Amanda began replying with more enthusiasm, eagerly awaiting his messages, feeling that flutter in her stomach she hadn't experienced with Oliver in years. Within a few weeks, they were meeting in secret. First, a quick coffee, then a longer lunch, then dinner at a restaurant Oliver would never take her to. And then, inevitably, a hotel room. The affair progressed quickly. Amanda felt alive again, desired, important. Brett knew exactly what to say, how to touch her, how to make her feel special. He painted a future where they'd be together, traveling the world, enjoying life without the constraints of a dull routine. He said she deserved a man who matched her caliber, who truly valued her, who could give her everything she'd ever wanted. Amanda began obsessively comparing Oliver, who spent hours in front of his computer solving code problems, versus Brett, who always had time for her. Oliver, who never surprised her with expensive gifts, versus Brett, who showed up with flowers, imported chocolates, and invitations to exclusive events. Oliver, who went to bed early and woke up early, versus Brett, who made her feel young again, free, unburdened. The decision slowly formed in Amanda's mind. She wanted out of the marriage. She wanted a fresh start. She wanted to live the life Brett promised, the life she saw on social media, the life she felt she deserved. And in her mind, it would be simple: she'd file for divorce, split the assets with Oliver, take her share, and move on with Brett. She figured she'd walk away with at least $100,000 or $150,000, maybe more, enough for a down payment on a new apartment, a better car, a few trips. Enough to restart with dignity by Brett's side. What Amanda didn't know was that Oliver had suspected her for months. He noticed the classic signs, those any attentive man would pick up on: her phone always face down on the table, notifications silenced, frequent outings with friends that used to be rare, the new perfume she started wearing, the new lingerie appearing in the closet but never worn at home, vague excuses about meetings running late. Oliver wasn't dramatic. He didn't throw jealous scenes. He didn't confront her with shouting. He simply observed, collected data, analyzed patterns, just as he did with software systems. And when he was certain something was going on, he acted with the same technical detachment. He hired a discreet private investigator, recommended by a trusted lawyer. Within 2 weeks, he had everything: photos of Amanda and Brett entering hotels, videos of them dining at romantic restaurants, legally recovered message logs, proof of suspicious transactions. Everything was documented, organized, and prepared for the right moment. Oliver stored it all in an encrypted digital folder, backed it up in 3 separate locations, and waited. He didn't confront Amanda. He gave no sign that he knew. He simply waited for her to make the first move, because he knew, with mathematical certainty, that she would. It was only a matter of time. Amanda finally asked for a divorce on a Tuesday night, after dinner. They'd eaten in silence, as had become routine. Oliver was washing the dishes when she appeared in the kitchen, took a deep breath, and said they needed to talk. He dried his hands, turned around, and waited. Amanda said she wasn't happy anymore, that she felt they'd grown apart, that she needed space to rethink her life, and that it was better they go their separate ways. She used all the clichés people use when ending things without admitting they've been unfaithful. Oliver listened silently, without interrupting or questioning. When she finished, he simply nodded and said he respected her decision. If that's what she wanted, he wouldn't stand in her way. He said he'd contact a lawyer to formalize everything as peacefully as possible. Amanda was surprised by how easy it was. She'd expected resistance, tears, pleas for reconciliation, promises to change. But Oliver just accepted it, as if agreeing to a minor change of weekend plans. She left that conversation relieved, almost euphoric. She called Brett that same night to say she'd done it, that she was free, that they could finally be together for real. He celebrated on the other end of the line, said he was proud of her, that a new chapter was beginning, and that they'd soon be traveling together, building the life they'd always dreamed of. The divorce hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Amanda hired a lawyer recommended by a friend, a professional who promised to ensure she walked away with what was fair and would fight for every cent she deserved. The lawyer reviewed the marriage documents, read the full separation of assets agreement Amanda had signed years earlier, and explained the situation. Due to the total separation regime, Amanda would only be entitled to assets acquired jointly during the marriage. Amanda wasn't worried. She figured she'd still walk away with a reasonable sum. After all, they'd lived together for years, shared expenses, built a life. In her mind, Oliver earned a fixed salary of about $80,000 a year. He must have some savings, maybe some company stock, and she'd get half of that. She did quick mental math. If he had around $200,000 saved, she'd get $100,000. That would be enough to start over. On the day of the hearing, Amanda arrived confident, almost radiant. She wore a new outfit bought especially for the occasion, salon-done hair, flawless makeup. She wanted Oliver to see she was fine, that she'd moved on, that she no longer needed him. Brett waited outside the courthouse in his car, sending supportive texts. Oliver arrived alone, as punctual as ever, wearing jeans, a plain white dress shirt without a tie, carrying only a thin brown leather briefcase. Amanda looked at him and felt a pang of pity mixed with disdain. She thought, poor guy, still wearing those simple clothes, still stuck in that small world. I did the right thing leaving. They sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. The judge entered, a middle-aged man with gray hair and the neutral expression of someone who'd seen it all. He greeted everyone, asked them to sit, and began the procedural formalities. Amanda barely paid attention. She was exchanging glances with her lawyer, smiling discreetly, thinking how wonderful it would be once it was all over. She imagined where she and Brett would go to celebrate, maybe that Italian restaurant he always talked about. The judge began reading the divorce terms in a monotone voice. He mentioned there were no children, that the marriage operated under a total separation of assets per the contract signed by both parties, and that both agreed to dissolve the marriage uncontested. Amanda signed the first document smoothly, her pen gliding effortlessly across the paper. She was almost laughing, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in months. Her lawyer beside her also seemed calm, flipping through papers with professional composure. But then the judge said, adjusting his glasses, before finalizing the proceedings, I'm required by state law to read aloud the full asset declaration submitted by the respondent, so both parties have complete awareness of all assets involved. Amanda looked up, still not truly concerned. She expected to hear something like, a used car, maybe a savings account with $50,000, some company stock. Simple, predictable things consistent with the life she knew. But what followed completely changed her expression. The judge began, reading from an official document. Oliver Grant, the respondent, declares a total net worth of $4,730,000. The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to suck the air from the room. Amanda blinked repeatedly, as if she hadn't heard correctly, as if the numbers made no sense. The lawyer beside her froze, her pen halting mid-note. Even the court clerk looked up, surprised. The judge continued, impassive, reading line by line as if reciting a grocery list. Registered intellectual property, including 3 algorithms licensed to technology and logistics companies, collectively valued at $1,200,000. Shares in technology companies, including stakes in early-stage startups and established firms, valued at $1,800,000. Investments in real estate funds and cryptocurrencies, valued at $900,000. Primary bank account with a balance of $400,000. Rural property registered in Montana, valued at $300,000. Vehicles, electronic equipment, and other tangible assets, valued at $130,000. Amanda felt all the blood drain from her face. Her hands began trembling uncontrollably. She turned to her lawyer with wide eyes, searching for an explanation, a mistake, any sign this was an error. The lawyer was visibly shocked too, frantically flipping through the documents in front of her, trying to understand how she'd missed something so enormous. The judge continued, now moving into the legal portion. As documented and properly reviewed by this court, the majority of these assets were acquired prior to the marriage or through personal investments made exclusively by the respondent, with no financial or direct contribution from the petitioner. Furthermore, the total separation of assets regime, voluntarily signed by both parties at the time of marriage, as recorded in the case file, legally exempts the petitioner from any claim or right to these assets. Amanda tried to speak, opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was as if her throat had closed shut. Her lawyer raised her hand, respectfully requesting a moment to review the documents more carefully. The judge nodded and waited, hands folded on the desk. Oliver remained completely impassive, staring straight ahead, showing no emotion. There was no triumph on his face, no anger, no satisfaction, just absolute calm, almost unsettling. Amanda's lawyer flipped through the papers with growing desperation. She quickly read the software licensing contracts, detailed bank statements, intellectual property registration certificates, investment proofs with exact dates. She checked the acquisition dates of each asset against the marriage date. Everything was flawless. Everything meticulously documented. Everything perfectly legal. She sighed heavily and whispered to Amanda, just loud enough to be heard in the silent room, "There's absolutely nothing we can do. It's all properly registered. You have no legal claim to any of this." Amanda felt tears begin to burn in her eyes. The judge, sensing there would be no objection, formally concluded, therefore, in accordance with the prior agreement and fully respecting the marital property regime freely chosen by both parties, the division of assets in this proceeding is limited exclusively to jointly acquired assets during the marriage, which total, furniture from the rented apartment, appraised by an expert at $3,000, and a joint bank account with a current balance of $1,200. The petitioner is legally entitled to exactly half of these amounts, totaling $2,100. $2,100. The words echoed in Amanda's mind like a sentence. She had just destroyed a marriage, thrown away years of companionship, bet everything on a fresh start with Brett, and was walking away with $2,100. Meanwhile, Oliver, the man she'd called unambitious, the man she thought was mediocre, the man she'd betrayed without remorse, had nearly $5 million. Amanda couldn't hold back anymore. She let out a dry, muffled sob that echoed awkwardly through the formal room. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide the tears now streaming freely. Oliver didn't look at her. He showed no pity, no satisfaction. He simply picked up his pen, calmly signed the final documents the judge slid toward him, gave a respectful nod, and left the room without looking back. His firm footsteps echoed down the hallway until they faded completely. Amanda remained seated for several more minutes, unable to stand. She held the pen with trembling hands, staring blankly at the documents in front of her, desperately trying to process what had just happened. How hadn't she known? How had she lived for years beside a man and never realized he had millions? How had she been so blind, so foolish, so arrogant? Her lawyer tried to comfort her with empty words about moving forward, but there was no comfort for a mistake this colossal. Outside the courthouse, Brett waited anxiously, leaning against his convertible, scrolling through his phone. When Amanda appeared, he immediately noticed her swollen face and smudged makeup. Something was very wrong. So? How much did you get? He asked with a hopeful, almost excited smile. Amanda shook her head repeatedly, tears returning. Nothing. I got nothing. Brett frowned, confused. What do you mean, nothing? You were married to him for years. He must have something. Amanda explained between choked sobs that Oliver had millions she never knew existed, but she had no legal claim because of that damn prenup she'd signed without reading years ago. Brett fell silent for several long seconds, processing the information. He glanced at his phone, then at her, then at the horizon. Then, without ceremony or embarrassment, he said, "Look, Amanda, I just remembered I've got an important appointment this afternoon. We'll talk later, okay?" He got in the car, started the engine, and drove off without checking the rearview mirror, leaving her literally alone on the courthouse sidewalk. Amanda tried calling him that same night. The call went straight to voicemail. She sent a text. It wasn't delivered, just a single gray check mark. She tried other social media. Blocked everywhere. Brett had simply vanished from her life, as if he'd never existed. The truth finally hit her with the full, brutal force of reality. He'd never been genuinely interested in her as a person. He'd been interested in what he thought she'd get from the divorce, the money he imagined she'd secure, the comfortable life she could provide. And now that there was no money, there was no Brett. That simple. That cruel. Amanda returned to the tiny apartment she'd hastily rented after leaving home, a place with ceiling leaks and constant traffic noise. She sat on the second-hand couch she'd bought and looked around at the bare walls. Too late, she realized she'd destroyed a stable marriage, a comfortable life, a man who truly cared for her, all for an illusion wrapped in empty promises and fancy dinners. In the months that followed, Amanda's life completely fell apart. She had to move into an even smaller apartment, sharing it with a coworker she barely knew. Her salary, which had seemed reasonable when splitting expenses with Oliver, now barely covered rent, bills, and food. The advertising agency she worked for underwent aggressive restructuring, and Amanda was among the first to be laid off. She desperately tried to find another job in the field, but the market was saturated and competitive, and she no longer had the same drive or confidence. She took sporadic freelance gigs, earning very little, struggling to pay even the most basic bills. Every overdue invoice, every job rejection, every lonely night in that miserable apartment was a painful reminder of the monumental mistake she'd made. Oliver, on the other hand, moved forward without looking back. He sold the apartment they'd shared and bought a spacious house in a quiet Seattle suburb with mountain views. He kept working, developing increasingly sophisticated algorithms and signing even larger contracts with multinational companies. He invested a significant portion of his wealth in causes he truly believed in, tech education programs for underprivileged communities, funding for promising small startups, donations to research institutions. He quietly helped friends in genuine need, without fanfare or expectation of recognition. He traveled to places he'd always wanted to see, Japan, Iceland, New Zealand, not for show, but because he could now do so without guilt or emotional baggage. Oliver didn't feel anger toward Amanda. Over time, whatever resentment might have formed simply evaporated, replaced by peaceful indifference. He felt pity, a genuine pity for someone who had absolutely everything within reach and threw it all away simply because she couldn't recognize value when it was right in front of her eyes. But it was distant pity, like the kind you feel for a tragic character in a movie. It no longer affected him. 2.5 years after the divorce, Amanda sat in a cheap cafe near her apartment, trying to stretch a small cappuccino over a full hour because she couldn't afford another. She worked on her old laptop, replying to emails from difficult clients who paid pennies for complex projects. That's when she saw Oliver walk in. He looked different, more confident in his posture, better dressed but still understated, and he was with a woman. She was naturally beautiful, without exaggeration, and they spoke lightly, laughing about something that had just happened. There was genuine intimacy between them, a real connection that Amanda recognized instantly because it was exactly what she'd thrown away. For one brief second that felt like an eternity, Oliver's and Amanda's eyes met. He recognized her instantly. There was an almost imperceptible pause, then he gave a slight nod, a polite, respectful gesture, but completely devoid of deeper emotion, and walked to his table, pulling out the chair for his companion before resuming their conversation as if Amanda were just another stranger in the cafe. Amanda sat frozen, gripping her empty cup so tightly her fingers turned white. Her chest tightened in a way she couldn't describe. It wasn't just envy, though envy was there. It wasn't just regret, though the regret was crushing. It was the brutal weight of realizing, with a clarity that physically hurt, everything she'd lost. It wasn't just the money, though the millions stung. It was the stability Oliver had always offered. It was the genuine partnership she'd never valued. It was the emotional security of having someone by your side who chooses you every day, even when you're imperfect. It was the chance to have built something truly solid with someone who, though quiet and even seemingly dull, was utterly reliable. She left the cafe before finishing the email she'd been writing, unable to bear being in the same space as Oliver and his rebuilt happiness. On the walk home, she couldn't afford an Uber, and the bus had just passed. She remembered the divorce hearing. The confident smile on her face as she walked into that courtroom. The arrogant certainty that she was doing the right thing. The exact moment the judge read the numbers and her entire world collapsed in seconds. She finally understood, with painful and definitive clarity, that some choices simply can't be undone. That trust, once shattered so brutally, can never be rebuilt. That certain mistakes come with too high a price. And she'd paid that price in full, but what hurt most wasn't what she'd lost. It was the awareness that she'd always had everything she needed, yet had been foolish enough to throw it all away with her own hands, thinking she deserved more, without realizing she already had enough. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.